I just want to start by saying thanks to AGI for arranging this webinar today. I think it's a timely topic and one that's certainly of interest to folks in our part of the world, and I think a lesson in a variety of issues related to science and public regulation and public communication. We'll go to the next slide. Just as Austin said, the Kansas Geological Survey is part of the we're a division of the University of Kansas. We have research and service responsibility. We don't have any regulatory responsibility. When it comes to this issue, we've worked closely with the Kansas Corporation Commission. They're the agency of regulatory responsibility for the state of Kansas, primarily for oil and gas, and so we've worked closely with them the way that the OGS has with the OCC. This is a map showing historic earthquake activity in Kansas. The legend down at the bottom is modified Mercalli, obviously, and you can see that Kansas, for the most part, is a relatively aseismic state. There's not a lot going on, and where it is, it's mostly along the Humboldt Fault Zone or the Nemaha Ridge. They're in sort of east-central Kansas. It goes north and south across the east end of the state. The next slide. We operated a seismic network with funding from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Army Corps of Engineers from 1977 to 1989, and these are the results of that activity. And again, you can see that we recorded a fair number of earthquakes in Kansas, but nothing like what we'll talk about here in a second. I would point out a couple things. One, we did see a lot of activity, as you would expect, along that Humboldt Fault Zone, and we saw some in this area of north central Kansas that today I think we might very well likely attribute to induced seismicity related to water flooding activities in that part of the world. I'll call your attention especially to this part of the state down here along south central Kansas, because that's really the area that we'll be talking about from now on. And we'll go to the next slide, which will show earthquake activity, and really we'll focus for almost the entire rest of the time here on really two counties in south central Kansas. We're right down along the Kansas-Oklahoma border. These are Harper counties to the west and Sumner County to the east. When Oklahoma began to see activity in 2011, we really didn't see anything until 2013. In September of 2013, we began to see these events mostly in this area of, like I said, in Harper County to the west, and then in this area, sort of southeastern corner of the county. This is really the largest event that we saw. That was in December of 2013, a 4.3 right on the edge of Sumner County. These events got our governor's attention, and probably what I'll talk about will be a little bit more of the public component of what we've been dealing with, since Bill and Austin covered a lot of what the mechanisms and some of the other issues associated with this issue. Our governor brought us together to talk about these events in the fall of 2013. We'll go to the next slide. Then in 2014, we began to see even more events. This slide is a little different scale. Just point out, here's Harper County, one of the counties I just talked to you about. Sumner County is here. These events correspond, the size of the dots corresponds with the magnitude of the earthquakes. I'll just call your attention, the largest city in Kansas is Wichita, which is less than 30 miles from where we're seeing a lot of this activity. Also, we had a couple of outliers in this process, one earthquake over here and another one up here that basically at this point are not only quite a ways from where we were seeing that other activity, but also quite a ways from any large volume disposal wells. At this point, I think the consensus is those might very well be natural events. Next slide. This is a close-up of that activity in Harper and Sumner County. So again, we've shifted scales, and we're back in Sumner County with these events, and Harper County with these events. This is 2014. We'll go to the next slide. The largest of those events was a 4.9 event that occurred in, then actually, if you could back up one slide. The largest of these events is sort of covered up by some other dots, but it's right here. It was a 4.9 event in mid-November of 2014. The closest town is the town of Milan. This is a relatively rural area in the state. There was some small damage. Go back, then go to the next slide. This is what probably is some damage. These are older buildings, brick buildings in that town. This is probably earthquake damage related to that event. This is maybe earthquake damage on an old post office there. We'll go to the next slide, which shows a schoolhouse and maybe some damage both here and here, but obviously this is minor amount of damage. You might be saying, well, what's a big deal on a 4.9 earthquake that doesn't cause any more damage than this? I guess my answer would be, in a part of the state that is not accustomed to high levels of activity, when you begin to see these kinds of events, you begin to worry about other kinds of structures like schools and courthouses that we've got there that certainly were not built to withstand some of the level of earthquakes that folks in Oklahoma have seen and what we might be concerned about in the future. So even minor amounts of damage will get your attention. Next slide. This is 2015 earthquakes, and you can see the beat goes on here. Sumner County here, Harper County here, and again, things haven't slacked off at all. Next slide. This is a graph showing both magnitude, a graph over time beginning in January of 13, and really you can see when that activity starts in September of 13, and then really almost sort of peaks out in terms of magnitude 2 and larger earthquakes, and then you can see a few 4 and larger earthquakes in November of 14, and then you can see the numbers continue in 15. Basically in January and February of 2014, our governor called the agencies involved with this issue together. Next slide, Lila. And began to talk about response. This correlates pretty closely in time, and Austin touched on this, with a Mississippian oil play that was moving into the state from Oklahoma and really started down here in Harper and Sumner counties. It sort of died out with both. It wasn't as productive as people had thought it had been, and then with lower prices, so it's really still focused here. We've got a lot of horizontal wells and a lot of big volume disposal wells. Next slide, down in those two counties. And there are some of the brine disposal trends, both the brine disposal trends on the right in terms of total volumes that you see. Those are just for those two counties that change over time. These are numbers that come from our Corporation Commission, a well count on the left, and you can see the increase in just those two counties. Next slide. So with that, the Kansas response, the governor created a task force on induced seismicity. The three agencies are the Geological Survey, Kansas Corporation Commission, and Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Health and Environment is on here because they regulate Class 1 disposal wells. Austin talked about Class 2 disposal wells and defined those pretty accurately. KCC regulates those in Kansas. KDHE regulates Class 1 wells, which tend to be more hazardous waste types wells. Lots fewer of those in the state, but they are of concern with this issue. So those three agencies formed the task force. We had a number of meetings, public meetings, developed a plan, got comments, revised the plan. The two primary things that came out of that plan, one was enhanced monitoring. I'll talk about that in a minute. The other was a seismic action score that consists of trying to both tease apart natural from man-made events and also guide the response. And that scoring is based on not just the magnitude of the earthquake, but also the clustering effect that Austin talked about before, and whether there were habitable dwellings anywhere close. Try to take all those into account, and then if we exceeded a score of a certain threshold, it would require the KCC to collect information and KDHE to collect information on disposal wells within 3 miles of the epicenters of those events. Just to point out something, we've got, and Austin touched on this, we've gotten an awful lot of help from a lot of people in this process. I particularly want to point out help from the USGS, and I'll talk about them more in a second. Almost all of those previous maps that I showed you showing those magnitudes and locations were maps based on data from the USGS and the Oklahoma Survey. When this started, we had no stations here in Kansas operated by the state. There were 2 operated by the USGS. We were really under-instrumented. So we were real reliant on the USGS for NEIC, National Earthquake Information Center, for data, and from the Oklahoma Survey. The network that I'm getting ready to describe included instrumentation that we got from the University of Missouri, so we've had a lot of help. We've also put a focus, as Austin touched on public information, public, trying to communicate with the public and listen to the public about this issue. Also done a lot of work in terms of legislative interaction and testified regularly about this. That's been one of the challenges. Public communication has been a challenge in this process. I also want to point out we're working, Austin and the folks at the USGS both, and a variety of folks are working with the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission and the Groundwater Protection Council on an induced seismicity task force that's dealing with this issue as well, and we've gotten help from those folks. The next slide. That seismic action plan is up on the web. I'll give the URL for that here at the end. Next slide. This is that temporary network. The two counties I mentioned, Sumner and Harper counties, those they show up as orange triangles, are a temporary network that the USGS, Justin Rubenstein and the folks at the USGS installed last April when we began to see an uptick in events. The other dots, the green and the blue ones should now be green. Those are stations that the Kansas survey, temporary stations the Kansas survey has installed to try and get maybe a little more broadly outside of where we're seeing the primary focus, and maybe also get into some of these counties where we haven't seen much activity yet to try and develop background data before we do see activity. Next slide. This was a response from the KCC. This is based on an order that just got released about 2.5 weeks ago. Again, the counties that we're talking about, this is Harper County here, this is Sumner County over here. They ask us to identify areas of concern, so those linear features are both where epicenters have clustered up. They're also based on some gravity and magnetic subsurface data. The KCC then drew 3-mile ellipses around there to identify zones of concern. They identified 5 of those in the 2 counties, and within those 5 areas have ordered the companies to do sort of a series of staged cutbacks over the first, beginning with the order. They will cut back all the disposal wells within those ellipses to 16,000 barrels. Within another 55 days, they have to go back to 12,000 barrels, and then at day 100, they have to be reduced to 8,000 barrels per day of disposal within those areas. And then at the end of 100 more days, we'll monitor, obviously, to see what we get in the way of events at the end of 100 more days or 180 days from the time of the order. We'll see what the response has been in terms of seismic activity and make an appropriate decision about, the KCC will make an appropriate decision about how to alter that order at that point. Next slide. Obviously, I said communication has been an important part of this. This is a circular that we've developed to communicate with the public on this issue. Next slide. And this is my last slide. The Kansas, it has the URL for the Kansas Seismic Action Plan. That order that I just showed you the map from the KCC is the second thing. We've put up a number of resources on induced seismicity on our website, that third URL. The fourth one is a statement on induced seismicity that was developed by the Association of American State Geologists, is that URL. One other thing I might point out that I should have put on here that I didn't, the National Research Council, National Academy of Sciences in 2012 did an excellent report on induced seismicity. A variety of resources that go along with that, including a nice video that has been highly useful for public communication. So those are some of the resources that are now available that we've referred people to. And with that, I'm done, and appreciate your attention, and again, appreciate AGI's work on this webinar.